tap on the microphone silenced the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced cheerfully, "it's time, the moment we've all been waiting for. Is baby Leonie a prince or a princess?" Laughter, claps, and someone whooped from the back. A silver-lined box was brought forward and handed to Armand, who accepted it with a performative grin. Gianna felt her breath lock in her chest. She'd begged him to just do something simple, something private, but he wanted spectacle. "Open it," a voice shouted. Armand gave a mock bow to the crowd and untied the ribbon. Gianna reached for his arm instinctively, but he pulled away, stepping into the spotlight as if only he belonged there. The lid lifted. A burst of pink, balloons, glitter, tiny feathers, all dancing into the air like stars set free. The crowd erupted. "A girl! Oh my goodness, congratulations. She'll be beautiful like her mother." But Armand didn't smile. He didn't clap. He didn't even blink. Instead, his jaw tightened. He stepped forward, raised one palm toward the band to cut the music. The chatter dimmed, confused. The room stilled. Then, his voice, cold, measured, cruel. "A girl?" Murmurs passed like wind across the crowd. "I don't need a girl," he continued. "I needed a boy, a son to carry my name. This," he pointed toward Gianna's belly without even looking at her, "is useless to me." Gasps shattered the silence. A fork dropped. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" Gianna didn't move, not a flinch, but her hand slowly came to rest over her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the shame her own father had hurled. "Armand," she breathed, barely audible. He turned and walked away, dropping the box as pink glitter floated to the floor like soft ash after a fire. Silence, then murmurs, then laughter, not joyful, but cruel. The kind of laughter that claws at dignity and leaves bruises in places you can't bandage. Phones were lifted. Recordings began. The damage was permanent. Gianna didn't cry. She didn't run. She inhaled softly, turned her face toward the chandeliers, and forced her trembling lips into something close to a smile. "You are not useless," she whispered, barely moving her lips, speaking only to the tiny life inside her. "You are my everything." Her fingers splayed wide over her stomach, cradling, protecting, promising. And that was the moment, the exact moment, that someone captured the now famous photo. A woman alone in a room of hundreds. Pink balloons still hanging midair, glitter still falling, and her hand resting gently over her belly, eyes closed, mouth whispering love into chaos. That image would go viral within hours. By midnight, the hashtags had exploded. Gender reveal disaster. Hashtag not useless. A girl mom strength. Hashtag Gianna rises. The comment sections boiled. If my man ever said that, I'd leave before he took his next breath. She's going to raise a queen. No child is useless. This man is trash. But none of it mattered to Gianna in that moment. She wasn't thinking of hashtags. She was thinking of her daughter, of the life inside her, and of how much love she would need to pour into that child to fill the canyon that Armand's rejection had carved. The lights dimmed. Guests slowly trickled out. Some came to offer soft apologies, empty sympathies. But no one stopped to ask Gianna what she needed. So she walked herself out, alone, her heels echoing on marble, her arms holding her belly, her silence holding a strength no man in that room could define. By morning, the media had already chosen its headlines. Armand Leon rejects pregnant wife at gender reveal party he called his baby girl. Useless. World reacts from heiress to humiliated. What happened to Gianna? Clips flooded TikTok, Instagram, even business pages. Everyone had an opinion, but none of them knew the whole story. They only saw pink glitter, a raised finger, and a woman left behind. Gianna's phone buzzed relentlessly. Is it true? Did he really walk out? Tell us your side of the story. She turned it off and dropped it in a drawer. Some friends sent heart emojis. A few said they were so sorry, but most disappeared altogether, as if her public shaming made her contagious. The silence was worse than the noise. The apartment emptied fast. Armand didn't just walk away. He erased her. In under a week, their joint accounts were frozen. His lawyers emailed a divorce draft. The penthouse locks were changed. She packed what she could, some clothes, a few keepsakes, a baby journal she'd started in her second trimester, and left behind everything else, including the dreams they'd once shared. Gianna moved into a modest one-bedroom on the edge of downtown. No doorman, no concierge, no penthouse view, just creaky floors and neighbors who never asked questions. She bought a second-hand crib and painted it herself. Soft lilac, a color she hoped her daughter would love. Each night, Gianna lay on a borrowed mattress, both hands on her belly, whispering stories into the quiet. "You don't need a palace to feel like royalty," she whispered. "You don't need his name to be strong. You are already more than enough." Her voice would crack sometimes, but she always finished the sentence, always ended on hope. She cried, "Yes," into her pillow, into her bathwater, into her sleeves while washing dishes. But she didn't crumble. She refused to. Days passed. She took long walks, avoiding the areas where photographers might be hiding. She deleted her social media. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted distance. But even strangers recognized her. At the grocery store checkout, someone muttered, "Is that her?" At the doctor's office, a nurse accidentally called her Mrs. Leone. She corrected them with a smile. Just Gianna now. She saw herself on a magazine cover while waiting in line at a pharmacy. A blurry image of her leaving the ballroom. Belly prominent, chin lifted. Alone. The headline, "Rejected, but not broken?" That question mark stabbed more than the rejection itself. Was she broken? She glanced down at her belly. Her baby gave a strong kick, like a reply. No. She wasn't broken, just beginning. She found work quickly, not because of connections, but because she earned it. Even her critics couldn't deny her brilliance. Before marriage, Gianna had been a respected strategist in corporate branding. After marriage, she had been used as a trophy. Now, she would be neither. She would be her own force. At night, she mapped out potential consulting clients. By day, she scheduled interviews. At every table she sat at, some man would lean in and ask, "How are you managing all this? With the baby?" And she would smile, fold her hands gently, and reply, "The baby isn't a problem to manage. She's my reason." Her belly grew rounder. Her stride slower, but her fire only intensified. People expected her to vanish. Instead, she rebuilt, brick by invisible brick. And she wasn't hiding. She was preparing. Her final appointment before her third trimester transition was with a well-known firm downtown. They had an opening for a senior campaign strategist. Gianna walked in wearing a pale gray dress that hugged her belly proudly. The receptionist blinked. "Do you have a portfolio?" Gianna nodded and handed it over. It was thin, but sharp. She was already walking into the next chapter. She just didn't know who would be waiting on the other side of that glass office door. But that would come in due time. For now, she walked home under a sky smeared with dusk, her hands cupping her belly, her lips whispering, "We'll be okay. We'll write our own story. And this time, no one gets to interrupt the ending." By the third month in her new apartment, the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. Gianna had started organizing her mornings around small victories. Tea steeping at exactly 6, a daily checklist pinned to the fridge, 20 minutes of walking before checking emails. She no longer flinched at baby stores or ads about perfect families. She trained herself to look forward instead of back. The past had taught her pain. The future demanded strength. She took consulting gigs here and there, nothing major, just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Each time a client hesitated at the sight of her pregnant belly, she calmly closed her binder and said, "If you want pretty overpowerful, you're in the wrong meeting." Some blinked, then signed the check. Others didn't. Either way, she didn't chase approval anymore. She chased independence. At night she wrote letters to her daughter, not in a journal, not typed, just handwritten pages on cream-colored paper, folded and tucked inside a small wooden box. Letters like, "Today I didn't cry, not even once. He doesn't get to define what you're worth. One day you'll ask me what happened at the party, and I'll tell you, your mother stood alone and still chose love." She began dressing with intent. No more oversized sweaters to hide her shape. Now, tailored midi dresses, crisp collars, statement earrings. The belly wasn't an apology. It was part of her presentation. At a networking event, a younger woman pulled her aside. "Can I just say, I watched the video when it first dropped. I cried for you. But seeing you now, you're... wow." Gianna smiled faintly. "We all rise in stages. You'll get there too. Then came the email, a private message from the executive assistant of Jeffrey Maddox, founder and CEO of Maddox Global Strategies. The subject line, interview request, Tuesday 11 a.m. She read it twice. She'd heard of Jeffrey, of course. The media called him the quiet billionaire, a man who avoided tabloids, didn't flaunt his wealth, and built his empire on grit and merit rather than inheritance. His reputation was clean, his team diverse, his success undeniable. But why her? She clicked reply. Happy to come in. I'll be 7 months along. Just a heads up. The response came in minutes, noted. You're expected. No fuss. No follow-up questions. Just respect. The morning of the interview, Gianna stood before the mirror adjusting her coat. Steel gray with a cinched belt that framed her bump like armor. She left her hair loose and bold. Her lipstick was muted but confident. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and chosen not to smell like smoke. The cab dropped her at the downtown high-rise. 42 floors. Tinted glass. No red carpets, no statues, just quiet sophistication. She entered the lobby and gave her name. The receptionist smiled. Mr. Maddox will see you on the top floor. The elevator's just to the right. No waiting. No form to fill. Just go up. The elevator ride felt like a heartbeat counting up. She could feel the baby shift, almost sensing the tension. Gianna placed a hand over her stomach. We're not here to beg, she whispered. We're here to offer something they didn't see coming. The doors opened. An assistant greeted her and led her into a sleek corner office with tall windows, dark wood shelves, and no trace of ego. Just function, clarity, and space. Then, him. Jeffrey Maddox stood up from his desk. Not stiff, not rehearsed. Just steady. Tall, neatly dressed, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable but kind. His eyes flicked briefly to her belly, then back to her face. Gianna, he said, crossing the room. Thank you for coming. She offered a firm handshake. Thank you for the invitation. He gestured for her to sit, then took the chair across from her, not behind the desk, but across from her, equal. I've followed your work, Jeffrey said. Long before the incident. She tilted her chin. That's not how most people remember me. Most people don't know how to look past a headline, he replied. But I watched the full clip, the moment when everyone turned their heads. But you stayed. She blinked. That wasn't strategy, she murmured. That was survival. Even more impressive, Jeffrey said. We don't need people who hide. We need people who rise. She didn't cry, but her throat tightened. He wasn't interviewing her. He was acknowledging her. He continued, There's a position open, senior strategist. The team is high-performing, results-driven. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for perspective, and you've got that in spades. Gianna took a breath. And the pregnancy doesn't scare you? Jeffrey leaned back. The only thing that scares me is hiring people who don't know what it costs to rebuild themselves. So, he asked, want to come rebuild something with us? She met his gaze. Not a rescue, not a favor, just a door she'd already earned. As she stood to leave, he said one more thing. Gianna? She turned. That pink confetti didn't mark the end of your worth. It just exposed his. She nodded, and for the first time in months, truly smiled. It had that morning. It wasn't just the job offer. It was how he'd offered it. No disclaimers, no hesitation, no mentions of maternity accommodations or return-to-work plans. Just, we want you, and you've earned this. She walked through the lobby with a stride she hadn't used since before. The scandal, back when people knew her for her mind, not her headlines. She wasn't hired in spite of her story. She was hired because of it. Her first day was quiet, efficient, and professional. No cameras, no pity, no whispered conversations about the girl from the video. Her new colleagues welcomed her with nods and respect, not because of who she had been married to, but because Jeffrey had personally signed off on her hire. That carried weight. Quiet weight, the kind that reshaped rooms without needing to roar. Her office had a view of the city, not skyline glamorous, just enough to remind her she was moving forward. She placed 2 things on the desk. 1, a framed ultrasound image. 2, a silver pen her mother had given her before passing, a reminder that Gianna's story had always been her own to write. Across the hall, Jeffrey's office remained mostly closed. He wasn't the kind of boss who hovered. but his presence, when he appeared, commanded stillness. Once she passed him in the corridor. Their eyes met. A polite nod. But there was a flicker. Not flirtation, something deeper. Recognition. By week 2, Gianna had rewritten the marketing brief for a major client. She saw gaps the team had missed, emotional triggers buried beneath cold statistics. She pitched a revision in the Monday meeting. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped, then another, and then Jeffrey's voice. "That," he said, "is what we've been missing." Later that day, Jeffrey stopped by her office. No assistant, no clipboard. "I owe you a coffee," he said casually. That pitch saved us from looking like amateurs. Gianna smiled. "I take mine with oat milk and gratitude." He raised an eyebrow. Noted. They walked to the break room together. He didn't ask about the baby, or Armand, or anything personal. Just talked about strategy, momentum, vision, and that alone made her want to know more about him. By month's end, the entire team had adopted her lead, shifting toward campaigns that focused on emotional intelligence and personal connection. The numbers backed it. Clients responded faster. Budgets increased. Jeffrey sent her a single message after their biggest win yet. "I knew you'd change everything." But it wasn't just work. It was the way he looked at her. Not as someone who needed saving, not as someone fragile, but as someone forged. One evening, as she gathered her things late after a client debrief, Jeffrey appeared at her doorway. He didn't knock, just leaned casually. "Still here?" he asked. "Creative insomnia," she replied, sliding a folder into her tote. He stepped in, closing the door halfway. "Can I ask something?" "Not on the record." Gianna arched a brow. "Depends how good the question is." He leaned on the edge of her desk, lowering his voice. "That day, the one in the video, you didn't flinch, not even when he pointed at you." She stared at him for a beat, then replied softly, "Because he wasn't talking about me. He was talking to the man in the mirror. He just didn't know it yet." Jeffrey inhaled slowly. "Damn, you asked." She smiled, grabbing her coat. "Yeah," he said, opening the door for her. "And I'm glad I did." From that night forward, the distance between them narrowed. Still professional, still polite, but charged. Some mornings, they arrived at the same time, shared an elevator, shared silence that wasn't awkward. It was curious. Some afternoons, she caught him watching her present, not just listening, watching. He wasn't waiting for her to fail. He was memorizing the way she rose. And in the quiet moments, those in-between breaths of office life, Gianna started to realize something. The man who once called her useless had been wrong about everything, because she was becoming more herself than she had ever been. And someone, finally, was watching her with the eyes of a man who saw her. The first spark wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a brush of hands or lingering stares. It was a moment. Quiet, intentional, unmistakable. It happened on a Tuesday. Rain tapped the glass of the boardroom windows, casting watery streaks across the skyline. The entire marketing team was in the middle of reviewing numbers for a luxury skincare brand that hadn't been responding to their usual strategy. Gianna leaned forward, fingers tapping the edge of her notebook. She waited for the team to exhaust their usual suggestions: discounts, influencer packages, brand refresh. Then she cleared her throat. "They're not looking for visibility," she said. "They're looking for belonging. Their audience is aging and feeling ignored. Sell comfort, not cream." Silence. Then a slow nod from the head of product. "That makes more sense than anything we've said all morning." Gianna jotted a note, not even glancing up. But Jeffrey did. From across the table, his eyes didn't just land on her. They settled there, like he'd just seen something he hadn't known he was waiting for. Later that day, she passed his office. The door was cracked slightly. He was alone, typing. She hesitated, then knocked lightly. "Do you have a second?" He looked up immediately. "For you?" "Always." She stepped in and held up her tablet. "That brand you asked me to dig into, Burrow and Bloom? Their last 5 campaigns targeted men, but 80% of their buyers are women over 35. Jeffrey stood and came around the desk to look over her shoulder. Close, too close, but neither of them moved back. "You see things," he murmured. "I try to see people," she said. Their eyes met, and for the first time since that humiliating night months ago, Gianna felt seen. They started working late more often, not intentionally, not coordinated. It just happened. She'd be sketching a pitch deck at 7:12 p.m. He'd be standing at the espresso machine 5 minutes later. One night, as she packed up, she asked, "Do you ever actually go home?" He chuckled. "Do you?" "Touché." He leaned against her doorframe. "You know," he said slowly, "most people would have crumbled after what you went through. I didn't have the luxury. It wasn't just survival," he said. It was transformation. That word caught her. She wanted to ask what he saw when he looked at her, but the question felt too vulnerable, too soon. Instead, she nodded. "That's generous." "No, that's truth." The next day, he sent her a small package. Inside, a hardcover journal. On the first page, a handwritten note, "For the stories you'll rewrite, and the ones you'll still create. G." She stared at the page for a long time, then picked up a pen, placed it gently on top and whispered, "Damn you." But her smile stayed long after the whisper. During lunch one afternoon, she asked, "Do you always give gifts to your team?" "Only the ones who saved my company twice in a quarter. That was once. I'm counting in advance." They laughed. Easy, natural, new. He never crossed a line. No touching, no late-night texts, no suggestions beyond professional praise. But Gianna could feel it. The tension, the invitation, and it terrified her how much she wanted to accept it. She told herself it was just chemistry, that hormones played tricks, that loneliness could be seductive. But it wasn't just physical. It was the way he listened. She once mentioned her favorite author in passing during a brainstorming session. 2 weeks later, a signed copy of that author's latest novel arrived at her desk. No note, no fanfare, just presence. He remembered the details. Because he was paying attention, one evening, she stayed long after everyone left. The office was silent except for the ticking clock and the soft hum of her desktop. She stepped into the kitchen to make tea and found Jeffrey already there, mug in hand. "This place is starting to feel like home," she joked. "Then I owe you furniture." She laughed. Then they stood there, sipping in silence, facing the windows where the rain traced quiet paths down the glass. "Gianna," he said softly. "Yes? I meant what I said when I hired you." She turned, one brow raised. "Which part?" "That I wasn't offering pity. I was offering respect. And maybe something more." She inhaled sharply, but didn't move. "Don't answer," he said quickly. "Not yet. Just know it's there." He placed his empty mug in the sink and walked out, leaving her heart pounding in the quiet. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of what he said, but because of how safe it made her feel, and how dangerous it felt to trust that feeling. The office lights had dimmed for the night. Most desks sat abandoned, save for Gianna's. She was still typing, still reviewing numbers for the upcoming campaign. Her body was tired, but her mind refused to slow down. Rain tapped against the windows again, soft, persistent. She rubbed her belly, closing her eyes for just a moment. The baby shifted beneath her palm, pressing gently, as if sensing her thoughts. "You're still here." His voice came from the doorway. She turned. Jeffrey stood with his suit jacket folded over one arm, tie slightly loosened, not disheveled, just softened, unarmored. "So are you," she replied, swiveling in her chair to face him. He stepped inside slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "I've been thinking about you." She tilted her head. "About the pitch or—" His gaze held hers. "About everything." He closed the door halfway. The room felt smaller, more personal. "I wasn't sure if I should say that," he admitted. "I didn't want to complicate what's already working." Gianna didn't speak. "Not yet." "I see how hard you work," he said, "but I also see how hard you carry everything else." She lowered her eyes. He continued, softer now. "I never understood what grace looked like until I watched you walk into this building your first day. Not as someone rebuilding, but as someone refusing to break." Gianna's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I didn't know anyone noticed." "I did." Silence pressed between them. Then, gently, Jeffrey asked, "How far along?" 7 months. His gaze flicked to her belly again, then back to her eyes. "May I?" he asked, voice hushed. She nodded slowly. He stepped forward, hesitating only once before reaching out. His hand hovered, then made contact. Warm, steady, intentional. She watched his eyes, not his hand, as her baby kicked beneath his touch. His breath caught. His eyes widened just a little, not with shock, but with something close to wonder. "She's strong," he murmured. "She is. She knows she's loved." Gianna's throat tightened. "I hope so. You've made sure of it." Their faces were inches apart now. The air between them felt charged, not chaotic, but focused, like something inevitable had been slowly walking toward them all along. His fingers moved from her belly to her waist, lightly, tentatively. She didn't pull away. "Gianna." She didn't answer. She leaned in. His lips met hers. There was no pretense, no caution. The kiss was hungry but slow, each second deepening, as if they'd both been holding back for too long. Her hand gripped the collar of his shirt. His arms wrapped around her lower back, anchoring her to him. When they parted, their foreheads rested together. "I thought no one could want me like this," she whispered. Jeffrey's voice was rough. "You have no idea how much I want you." She exhaled, and with it came weeks of tension, longing, loneliness. "Come with me," he said. They arrived at his penthouse an hour later. No chauffeur, no elevator chit-chat, just silence filled with anticipation neither of them dared interrupt. Inside, the space was warm, understated, not flashy, just clean, intentional, lived in. He helped her out of her coat. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I need this. I need you." He kissed her again, deeper this time. She moaned into his mouth as his hands moved slowly over her hips, her waist, up her spine. He pulled her close, careful of her belly, but not afraid of it. She led him to the bedroom. There was no rush. He undressed her gently. His hands never fumbled. They memorized. Every inch of her body felt sacred beneath his gaze. When she reached for his buttons, he stilled her hands. "Let me." He peeled off his shirt, his trousers, then stood before her, bare and unguarded. "You're beautiful," she whispered, tracing his chest. "So are you." He laid her back on the bed, lips exploring from her collarbone to the swell of her breasts, down to her hips. He kissed the underside of her belly, slow, reverent. Her breath hitched. He moved over her, pausing only to look into her eyes. She nodded, and then he was inside her, filling her, grounding her, restoring her. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't performance. It was worship. Her moans came in waves. His name left her lips in fragments. Her fingers dug into his shoulders as pleasure built and spread. Her body arched. His lips brushed her ear. "You're not ruined," he whispered. "You're reborn." She cried out, overwhelmed, undone. And when her climax came, it wasn't just release, it was freedom. He followed moments later, trembling against her, breath ragged, murmuring her name like a vow. Afterward, he held her. No words, just warmth. Her head rested on his chest. His hand caressed the curve of her belly, then moved up to stroke her hair. It was the first time in months she hadn't felt alone. She whispered, "I thought I'd forgotten how this felt." He kissed her forehead. "Then we'll relearn it together." She closed her eyes, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, she slept. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft gold across the bedroom floor. The scent of rain still lingered from the night before. Gianna stirred, her body sinking deeper into the silk sheets beneath her. For a second, she didn't remember where she was. Then she felt it. The weight of an arm wrapped around her waist. The steady rise and fall of breath behind her. The warmth of skin, bare and close. She turned slightly and saw Jeffrey, still asleep, jaw relaxed, one hand resting protectively over her belly. The quiet between them was no longer awkward or tense. It was full. She studied him in the morning light, the softness in his face, the slight part in his lips. She'd seen him in boardrooms, in meetings, in motion. But not like this. Not vulnerable, not real. Her fingers brushed along his forearm. He stirred, eyes fluttering open. They locked with hers. He didn't speak. He simply leaned forward and kissed her, lightly, deliberately. "Morning," he whispered. "Hey, how do you feel?" She stretched slightly, the sheets slipping down her shoulder. "Sore, but whole." He smiled. "Good sore?" She nodded. "The best kind." They stayed in bed longer than planned. There was no rush to dress, No pressure to explain. He brought her water. She fed on fruit from the bowl by the window. They sat cross-legged, half covered in blankets, sharing pieces of melon in silence. She laughed once when he tried to peel an orange with one hand while the other stayed looped around her back. Multitasking isn't your strong suit, she teased. I disagree, he said. I'm holding a goddess and feeding her citrus. That's art. She blushed. He reached out, wiped a drop of juice from her chin, and kissed her again. Later, as she stood in his walk-in closet browsing for something to wear, she heard his voice from the doorway. Everything in there is yours now if you want it. She turned, a button-down shirt draped over one arm. I'm not looking for a rescue. I know, he said. I'm not offering one. I'm offering room, space, something that feels like yours. She studied him. The sincerity was quiet, not grand, but it hit deeper than any speech Armand had ever given her. Thank you, she said softly. By mid-morning, she stood on his balcony in one of his oversized sweaters, coffee in hand. Her hair was tied loosely. Her body moved slower now, comfortably. Jeffrey joined her, shirt half-buttoned, barefoot. The city stretched out before them, alive and oblivious. He slid his hand around her waist and kissed her temple. I haven't asked, are you scared? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Sometimes. But not like before. What's different now? She turned to face him. You. They didn't speak of labels. There was no mention of what they were or weren't. But that night changed everything. Not because of the sex, because of the safety. She went home in the early afternoon to shower, change, and gather some work materials. The apartment felt different now, smaller, quieter. She sat for a moment on the edge of her bed, staring at the crib in the corner. She reached for her journal and wrote only one line. For the first time, I felt like I was allowed to be soft again. The next few days blurred into a rhythm neither of them dared define. At work, nothing changed outwardly. Jeffrey remained professional. So did she. But their connection hummed beneath every glance, every brush of a shoulder in passing. One evening, she stayed behind to finish a pitch deck. Jeffrey walked past her office but paused. Dinner? She looked up. Take out? He smiled. Italian. My place. She grabbed her coat. That night, they didn't make love. They talked. About childhood. About losses. She told him about her mother. How she'd passed when Gianna was 17. How she'd taught her the difference between silence and stillness. He told her about his brother, lost in a car crash when they were both teenagers, and how that grief had made him build, always build. By the time they climbed into bed, the vulnerability between them was heavier than any physical intimacy could have matched. She rested her head on his chest and whispered, I didn't know I missed being held. His hand traced lazy patterns down her back. You deserve to be held. Often. The next morning she woke to the sound of bacon sizzling and soft music playing from the kitchen. She followed the smell barefoot, finding him humming, spatula in hand. You cook? She asked. Survival skill. She laughed. This isn't survival. This is seduction. He turned, playful. Is it working? She walked up, wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, and kissed his back. Yes. By the time the sun rose fully, they were back in bed, coffee on the nightstand, warmth beneath the sheets. She curled into him, tracing circles on his chest. I know this started unexpectedly, she said, but it feels right, he finished. Yes. They lay there in silence, both knowing something unspoken had solidified. Not claimed, not promised, just understood. Gianna stood before the mirror in Jeffrey's master bathroom, loosely wrapped in a robe. She wasn't hiding her reflection anymore. Her belly was pronounced now, firm and round beneath the soft cotton. Stretch marks traced delicate lines along her hips. Her breasts felt fuller. Her cheeks carried a warmth that hadn't been there just weeks ago. But what struck her most was the look in her own eyes. Steady, whole. She was beginning to recognize herself again. Behind her, Jeffrey leaned against the doorframe. Shirtless. Quiet. You look like you belong here, he said. She turned, one hand resting at the tie of her robe. Do I? His gaze didn't waver. Every part of you does. They'd spent the day working from opposite ends of the penthouse. Emails, Zoom calls, strategy documents. But the distance had only made the pull stronger. Now, as twilight colored the city in hues of rose and ash, something simmered between them again. Not urgent, but heavy, like an unspoken promise waiting for permission. She walked toward him slowly. "Do you want me?" she asked, voice low. His answer came without hesitation. "I crave you." He stepped forward, untied her robe, and let it fall. Her body was bared to him again, but this time she didn't shy away. She met his gaze head on. He dropped to his knees. His hands came to her hips, thumbs pressing softly into her sides. His mouth moved to the curve of her stomach, kissing her skin as if every inch carried meaning. Then he looked up at her and said, "You are more powerful like this than I've ever seen anyone." Her fingers slid into his hair. "Then show me what it means to be wanted." He rose, lifting her with him. They moved to the bed, the sheets still warm from the sun. He laid her down carefully, as though handling something rare. His hands ran the length of her thighs, parting them slowly. His lips traced fire across her skin. He kissed her belly, her breasts, her neck, her pulse. Every touch was deliberate, measured, like he was writing something with his mouth that his heart couldn't yet say aloud. When he entered her, she gasped. Not from pain, not from surprise, from the ache of remembering what pleasure used to feel like. Her body arched, meeting his. Her hands gripped his shoulders. Her breath hitched with every slow thrust. "You're not just mine," he whispered against her collarbone. "You're you again." She didn't speak. She couldn't. She let the tears fall instead. They mingled with sweat, with kisses, with moans that rose in crescendo as he worshipped her body with hands that didn't hesitate and lips that didn't lie. Hours passed like minutes. They didn't just make love once. They returned to each other in waves, soft, intense, playful, reverent. He ran a bath for her afterward, gently lowering her into the warm water. He washed her back, her arms, her feet. He held her hand the entire time, not as an obligation, as devotion. Later, wrapped in towels and exhaustion, they lay across the bed, limbs tangled. She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "You don't look at me like I'm broken. You never were." "I felt like I was," she whispered. "For a long time." He shifted closer, brushing her damp hair behind her ear. "I don't want you to ever feel that again, not even on the hard days. Especially not on the hard days." She sighed into his chest. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. "I believe in choice," he said. "Fate may bring people close, but only courage keeps them there." She smiled. "I like that." They stayed like that until the city darkened and quiet settled deep into the walls. Outside, life continued. Inside, she rediscovered something she hadn't felt since before the shame, before the headlines. The right to be touched without judgment. The freedom to feel beautiful, powerful, and soft all at once. And for the first time in months, she didn't just believe she'd survive. She believed she could be happy. She rose from bed, naked and glowing, to fetch water from the kitchen. When she returned, Jeffrey was sitting up against the headboard, sheets, low on his waist, eyes fixed on her as though memorizing the sight. He reached out a hand. She took it. He pulled her back into bed, whispering. Again, their bodies met once more, this time slower, deeper. No rush, no noise, just rhythm and breath. And when she came apart beneath him, she cried again, not from sadness, but from release, from the miracle of feeling whole in someone else's arms, and still knowing she was complete all on her own. The evening air was still and soft. A thin breeze passed through the open balcony doors of Jeffrey's penthouse, rustling the linen curtains as if the night itself were breathing. Gianna stood on the edge of the room, looking out over the city. The light stretched far, alive and indifferent. She wore one of Jeffrey's shirts unbuttoned at the top, the fabric brushing gently over her belly. Her hands rested over the curve of her stomach, fingers splayed protectively. The baby had been kicking more frequently that day, little thumps and rolls that made her wince and smile at the same time. Behind her, Jeffrey approached with a folded blanket and a warm expression. "Sit," he said softly. She let him guide her to the armchair by the balcony doors. He draped the blanket over her legs, then knelt beside her, hands on her knees. "You've been quiet tonight. I've been thinking." "Nervous?" She nodded. "It's getting close." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm here, for all of it." She swallowed. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it. I'm choosing it. Their eyes held a moment longer before she exhaled and leaned her head back. Later, they shared a late dinner at the kitchen island. Nothing extravagant, pasta and grilled vegetables. He watched her carefully, noticing the way she shifted in her seat every few minutes. Back pain? She nodded. Pressure's building. It feels heavier. He set down his fork and stood behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders, kneading gently. She closed her eyes, letting herself melt into his touch. You know, he murmured, you make motherhood look like something sacred. She opened her eyes, smiling faintly. Most days it feels more like survival. But tonight, you're glowing. She leaned back into his chest. Maybe it's love, she whispered. His arms wrapped around her middle. Maybe it's both. The rest of the night unfolded in quiet companionship. He drew her a bath again. She soaked while he read aloud from a novel they'd been trading chapters from. His voice calmed her, even when the cramps in her lower back began to creep in stronger waves. She said nothing at first, not even when the warm water no longer soothed. But when the sharp ache struck around her spine, she winced. Jeffrey paused mid-sentence. Was that? She nodded slowly, exhaling. I think they're starting. The calm cracked just enough for urgency to slip in. Jeffrey stood immediately, grabbing a towel and helping her out of the bath. Hospital bag? He asked. In the closet. He moved with efficiency but not panic, zipping the duffel, grabbing her cardigan, sliding on her shoes. She paused near the bed, doubling over slightly, holding her belly. Jeffrey was at her side instantly. Breathe with me, he said. She looked up at him, sweat already forming along her hairline. You're sure you're ready for this? She asked. He smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheek. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The drive to the hospital was a blur. City lights rushed past, each one a flicker in her periphery. Gianna gripped the door handle between contractions, breathing through clenched teeth. Jeffrey didn't fill the silence with words. He just held her hand. That was enough. Inside the maternity ward, the staff moved with calm efficiency. Monitors, gowns, a hospital bed. The nurse adjusted Gianna's position and offered her water. Jeffrey stayed close, never once stepping back. As another contraction hit, her grip on his arm tightened. He leaned down, forehead resting against hers. You're doing amazing. She shook her head. It hurts. I know, he whispered. But you're not alone. Hours passed. Time lost shape. Gianna drifted in and out of exhaustion and pain. Nurses came and went. Jeffrey stayed planted beside her, whispering encouragement between contractions. Wiping sweat from her brow, pressing her hand to his lips when words failed. At one point, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. Will she be okay? Jeffrey nodded. She'll be perfect, just like you. By the time her body began to push, Gianna had nothing left to give but instinct. Her strength came in waves, each one deeper than the last. Jeffrey never let go of her hand. And when the final cry burst into the room, sharp and alive, Gianna's head fell back against the pillow. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The nurse laid the baby on her chest. Tiny, warm, breathing. Layla. Jeffrey stood frozen for a second before he moved closer. He looked down at the child in Gianna's arms, then at the woman who had just brought her into the world. His lips trembled. Then he kissed Gianna's forehead. She's here, she whispered. She's perfect, he said. Later, after the baby was swaddled and sleeping in the clear bassinet beside the bed, Jeffrey sat at Gianna's side, fingers laced through hers. She was half asleep, head turned toward him. You didn't run, she murmured. Not even tempted. You stayed. Forever, he replied. Outside the hospital window, the sky began to lighten. A new day. A new life. And the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both now understood. This wasn't just a chapter. It was the rewrite. The room was quiet again. After the storm of contractions, after the flood of tears and tremors, the stillness felt almost foreign. But there she was, Layla, wrapped in a soft white blanket, a pink cap pulled gently over her tiny head. Chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm as she slept beside her mother. Gianna watched her in awe, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Every detail, her nose, her tiny fingers curled into miniature fists, the way her lips pouted as she dreamed, was a revelation. This was the child she had protected through rejection, through grief, through silence. This was the child who had made her stronger. She reached out and touched Layla's cheek with the back of her finger. Soft, warm, real. A sob caught in her throat, not from pain, but from joy so deep it almost hurt. Jeffrey returned with 2 cups of coffee. He stepped softly, as though even his footsteps could disrupt the sacred moment. "She's asleep?" he asked quietly. Gianna nodded. Like an angel. He came closer, handed her a cup, then crouched beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the sleeping bundle. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, with a shaky voice, he said, "I've never seen anything so perfect." Gianna looked at him. "She looks like you." He smiled. "She's already stronger than I ever was." "She had to be," Gianna replied. "She had to survive the day her own father walked away." Jeffrey's expression darkened briefly, then softened again as he reached forward. His finger brushed the back of Layla's tiny hand. Her fingers twitched. Then slowly they wrapped around his. He froze. And that was when it happened. A small sound, barely a whisper, escaped her lips. Then another, a gurgle, a stretch. Then, suddenly, a cry. Not loud, not piercing, but clear, strong. Layla's first cry filled the space like sunlight pouring through the blinds. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was presence. Gianna instinctively reached forward, pulling her daughter close, pressing her to her chest. She kissed the top of Layla's head, rocking gently. Jeffrey stood now, eyes wide, hands hovering as though unsure if he was worthy of touching either of them. Gianna looked up. "She's saying hello." He laughed, softly, tearfully. "Hello, Layla," he whispered. Her cries softened, lulled by her mother's heartbeat and the familiar rhythm of safety. The nurse entered quietly, clipboard in hand. "She sounds healthy," she said with a gentle smile. "We'll check her vitals soon. For now, just let her rest against you. Skin to skin helps regulate her breathing." Gianna nodded. "I can step out for a bit," Jeffrey offered, beginning to move toward the door. But Gianna reached for his hand. "Stay." He froze. "You're her father. You should stay." He blinked, stunned by the words. Gianna held his gaze. "If you still want that." "I do," he said instantly. "I've wanted it from the moment you told me she was 7 months. You never asked for proof." "I didn't need it." He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the bundle nestled against her chest. Gianna leaned into him, letting her head rest on his shoulder. He rested his cheek against the top of hers. They stayed like that for a long time. Not as lovers, not as CEO and strategist, just as a man, a woman, and the child that had made them a family. Later, the nurse returned and gently took Layla to measure her weight and check her temperature. Gianna lay back, suddenly aware of the exhaustion pressing into her bones. Jeffrey stood beside her, brushing hair from her forehead. "You should rest," she nodded. But before her eyes closed, she whispered, "You're really here. I'm not going anywhere." The room dimmed. Machines hummed softly. The chair beside her bed creaked as Jeffrey sat down, watching over both of them. And in that small hospital room, as the world spun on, something monumental had quietly begun. A promise, a life, a love that had no need to prove itself. It simply was. When Gianna woke again, it was just after midnight. The room was dark, save for the soft light above the bassinet. She turned her head and saw Jeffrey standing there, rocking Layla gently. He didn't see her watching him. He was humming some old lullaby, off-key but tender. Layla stared up at him with wide eyes, alert and calm. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You'll always be safe." Gianna smiled, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Not because of the pain, but because it was real, and because she no longer had to do it all alone. The days after Layla's birth unfolded like delicate pages in a journal no one had written before. Each one brought something new, a sound, a movement, a moment that reminded Gianna she had entered a new world, one where time no longer obeyed meetings or routines, one where everything, revolved around the needs of a tiny girl who had already rewritten her mother's understanding of love. Layla didn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. Her cries were soft but insistent, and her presence filled the apartment, in a way that felt permanent, even though she couldn't yet speak a word. And Jeffrey? He never left. At night, he rocked her. He learned how to hold a bottle at the perfect angle. He changed diapers without complaint. He learned the difference between her hungry cries and her sleepy ones. He learned how to fold his body around Gianna's without touching her incision. He made her tea before she asked. He memorized the brand of cream she liked on her toast. He never needed to be told what to do. He just did it. One evening, Gianna stood at the kitchen sink, watching Jeffrey from across the room. He sat in the nursery chair, shirt wrinkled, hair slightly tousled, Layla curled into his chest, tiny fingers wrapped around one of his. He rocked slowly, humming the same melody she'd heard him use in the hospital. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, hand pressed against her heart, breathing in something she hadn't known she could trust again. Peace. Later, while Layla slept in her bassinet, Jeffrey placed a hand on Gianna's lower back as they stood in the living room. "You haven't looked in the mirror yet," he said. Gianna raised an eyebrow. "Is that your way of saying I should?" "It's my way of saying you might see what I see now." She stepped toward the hallway mirror. Her reflection met her with quiet honesty. Messy hair, faint lines beneath her eyes, a body that bore the proof of birth, curves softened, ribs fuller, stretch marks visible and bold. But the woman looking back wasn't diminished. She was transformed. "I don't look like I used to," she murmured. "Good," Jeffrey replied, stepping behind her, eyes locked on her reflection. "Because that woman was surviving, this one is becoming." She turned, resting her forehead against his. "Sometimes I still feel broken. You're allowed to feel that. But you're not. I never thought I'd be seen like this again." He pulled her into his chest. "I don't just see you, Gianna. I see her, too." They stood like that for minutes. No music, no talking, just breath and heartbeat and knowing. Later that week, Gianna woke to find the crib empty. She sat up quickly, only to hear soft cooing from the hallway. She rose and padded barefoot toward the sound. Jeffrey was in the living room, standing by the window in the faint blue of early morning. Layla was nestled in one arm. He was whispering to her. She stopped short, not wanting to interrupt, but the words made her breath catch. "I don't care what blood says," Jeffrey murmured. "You're mine now. You're my daughter. From the moment I touched your mother's belly and felt you kick, I belong to you." Layla wriggled softly. He smiled down at her. "I'll never ask you to earn it. My love doesn't come with a test. It just is." Gianna stepped forward. Jeffrey looked up, startled, but didn't pull away. "She didn't wake you, did she?" he asked gently. "No," Gianna said, voice low. "I just missed her." She reached for Layla, and he handed her over carefully. The baby sighed against her mother's chest, settling instantly. Jeffrey watched them both, then said softly, "I meant every word." Gianna nodded, eyes never leaving his. "I know." That afternoon they sat together on the floor of the nursery, folding newborn clothes into baskets and laughing at how tiny everything was. Gianna held up a onesie covered in tiny lemons. "Can you imagine her walking around in this a year from now?" "She'll run before she walks," Jeffrey said. "Mark my words." Gianna smiled, folding the garments slowly. "I used to imagine doing this alone. Now you don't have to." She looked up. "I don't expect you to stay out of guilt." "I'm not staying out of obligation," he said quietly. "I'm staying because she's mine in every way that matters." Gianna inhaled, emotion rising in her chest. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." That night, after the baby was asleep and the house had gone still, Jeffrey returned from the balcony and found Gianna sitting at the dining table, journal open, pen in hand. She didn't look up as he approached. He stood behind her, reading the words over her shoulder. "Letter to Layla, week 1. You don't know this yet, but your life changed mine before you even took your first breath. You made me brave. You made me fight. You made me believe I deserved more than silence and survival." She paused, then wrote one final line. "You gave me a new kind of love and someone brave enough to share it with me." Jeffrey kissed the top of her head and said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. Gianna stood before the bathroom mirror, towel wrapped low around her hips, steam curling around her from the freshly run shower. It had been 3 weeks since Layla's birth. Her body was different now, tender in some places, tighter in others. Her belly was softer, her hips wider, her breasts heavier, fuller from feeding. There were faint purple lines where her skin had stretched, delicate as brush strokes across a canvas. She touched the marks, traced them with her fingertips. They didn't make her wince. Not anymore. She turned slightly to the side, examining her reflection. This was her body now. Not ruined, not broken, changed, rewritten. Behind her, the door opened. Jeffrey entered quietly, holding a fresh set of sheets folded in his arms. He paused when he saw her standing there. Gianna didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a robe. She didn't cover herself. She just looked at him. His gaze lingered, not in judgment, not in curiosity, but in reverence. "You're staring," she said. "I can't help it." She turned to face him. "This body created a life." He nodded slowly. "And I've never seen anything more beautiful." He stepped closer, placing the folded linens on the counter, then reaching for her hand. "May I?" She nodded. His fingers slid along the curve of her waist, down her back, across the small scar near her navel where the IV had rested during labor. His other hand came up, resting against her ribs. "You feel strong," he said. "I feel tired, I know, but still, strong." She looked up into his eyes. "I'm afraid I'm not ready." "Then we wait," he said simply. No pressure, no performance, just time. But that night, something changed. After putting Layla down in her bassinet and turning on the soft white noise beside the crib, Gianna walked back into the bedroom to find Jeffrey already waiting. He sat on the edge of the bed, shirt off, cotton pants slung low on his hips. A book lay open on the nightstand, but he wasn't reading it. His eyes were on her. She hesitated in the doorway, then took one slow step forward. "Do you want me like this?" she asked, her voice quiet. "More than ever," he replied, standing now. "But only if you want me too." She walked toward him, slow and deliberate. "I'm ready to feel like myself again." He helped her out of her clothes with the same care he'd used the first night, patient, focused, with no urgency in his movements. His lips found her collarbone first, then her shoulder, then the curve of her jaw. When his hands slid down her sides and found the softness of her belly, he paused. "Here," he said, "is where life started." She exhaled, lips trembling. "Here," she whispered, "is where I thought I'd lost my power." He kissed her stomach. "Then let me remind you." He laid her down gently, stretching beside her on the bed, his hand exploring every inch of her with reverence and calm precision. He kissed the marks she once called flaws. He worshipped the parts of her she had spent months trying to reclaim. And when his lips found her thighs, her breath caught in her throat. She arched into him slowly, trusting each sensation. There was no rush, no expectation, just the rise and fall of rediscovery. When he moved over her, she welcomed him fully. The moment he entered her, she gasped, not from pain but from recognition. Their bodies found rhythm again, not the urgent kind, but the kind that hummed with quiet intensity. Every thrust felt like a vow spoken without words. Every moan was permission to let go. She clung to his shoulders, nails grazing his back as her hips met his. His mouth moved along her throat, his name a breath across her skin. "You're not just beautiful," he murmured. "You're divine." Her hands cupped his face. "Don't stop." He didn't. He moved with her, responding to every shift, every sound, every whisper. And when she finally cried out his name, it wasn't just release. It was reclamation. It was herself returning. Afterward, they lay tangled in silence. No pillows between them. No space. Just limbs and breath and warmth. Gianna rested her head on Jeffrey's chest, one hand resting above his heart. "I didn't think I'd feel this again." "You didn't just feel it," he said, stroking her back. "You owned it." She smiled softly. "I was afraid you'd see me differently." "I do," he said. She tensed slightly. He continued, "I see you stronger. I see you braver. I see you exactly as you are, and I want all of it." She closed her eyes, letting his words settle into her skin like balm. From that night forward, something shifted. She didn't flinch when she passed a mirror. She didn't hesitate when Jeffrey touched her. She stood taller, moved slower, but with intent. She wasn't returning to the woman she had been. She was stepping fully into the woman she had become. And Jeffrey was still there. Every morning, every night. Not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. The knock came just before noon. Gianna had just laid Layla down for her nap. The apartment was quiet, warm, and bathed in soft afternoon light. She moved toward the door, expecting a delivery. She didn't look through the peephole. She opened it and froze. Armand, standing in a wrinkled button-down, collar askew, eyes rimmed in red. Not the polished man from the ballroom, not the cold strategist who'd abandoned her for carrying the wrong gender. This man looked smaller, rougher, as though time and failure had been chewing at the edges of his pride. Her first instinct wasn't fear, it was disgust. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Gianna's voice cut the silence. "What are you doing here?" I needed to see you." She didn't step aside. "Why?" His eyes darted past her shoulder. "Is she here?" Gianna's back straightened. "You don't get to ask about her. I'm her father. You're the man who walked away." Armand ran a hand through his unkempt hair, frustration lacing his voice. "That was a mistake." Gianna arched a brow. "A mistake that made headlines. A mistake you filed legal paperwork for. A mistake you weaponized against your own child before she ever drew breath." He shifted. "I was under pressure. My father, our board, legacy was on the line. I reacted poorly." Gianna's face remained expressionless. "I don't care about your legacy. I care about her now." "No," she replied. "You care about your name, and you're losing it. That's what brought you back." His jaw clenched. "I saw the pictures," he said. "You and Maddox, holding my daughter. She's not yours. She's my blood. She's my life." They stood in a silent standoff, history crackling between them like broken glass. "I want to see her," Armand said. "Even if you hate me. I have a right. You forfeited that right the moment you pointed to my stomach and said she was useless. That was emotion. That wasn't truth. It was enough to walk out. It was enough to let me hemorrhage in silence while you went to another gala and posed like a grieving husband." He stepped closer. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to ask. And I'm not here to forgive." The elevator down the hall dinged. Footsteps approached. Jeffrey turned the corner, briefcase in hand, suit jacket over his shoulder. He stopped mid-step when he saw Armand. Gianna didn't move. Jeffrey approached slowly, his gaze moving from her to the man standing too close to his door. "Is everything all right?" Jeffrey asked, voice even. Gianna didn't break eye contact with Armand. "I have it handled." Armand's expression darkened. "So this is the man who took my place?" "No," Jeffrey replied calmly. "You left your place. I just stepped into the empty space you abandoned." Armand turned to Gianna. "He's not her father." "He is," she said. "In every way that counts. She's my daughter." "She's my daughter," Gianna said sharply, voice rising for the first time. "And I won't let you confuse that child with your ego. You didn't want her when she was a heartbeat inside me. You don't get to want her now that she's breathing." Armand looked at Jeffrey. "I could take you to court." Jeffrey stepped closer, now standing beside Gianna. He didn't touch her, but his presence became a shield. "You could try, and you'll lose. I have the bloodline. You had the chance." Armand's hands curled into fists. Jeffrey tilted his head. "You're not welcome here. If you show up again unannounced, we'll consider it harassment. If you want a legal battle, be my guest. But I assure you, your public image will not survive the truths Gianna kept private." Gianna stepped forward. "I suggest you walk away before Layla wakes up and sees a stranger yelling at her mother." Armand looked between them, at the unity, at the calm he couldn't rattle. Then, for the first time since that confetti fell, he backed away. He walked down the hall without another word, shoulders stiff, head low. Gianna closed the door slowly behind him. She leaned against it for a second, the tension leaving her body like a sigh. Jeffrey walked over. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just wrapped his arms around her and let her rest her forehead against his chest. "He's not coming back," Jeffrey said. "He'll try, and we'll be ready." Later that evening, while Layla napped on the couch, Jeffrey sat on the floor sorting through papers. Gianna emerged from the bedroom, holding a manila envelope. "What's that?" he asked. "My lawyer gave it to me months ago, just in case." She handed it to him. Inside, notarized declarations of sole custody, prenatal receipts, proof of abandonment, statements from doctors, screenshots of Armand's silence, evidence. "I never wanted to use it. Now you might have to." She nodded. "But if I do, I want you beside me. You already have me." They sat together in silence. Outside, rain tapped against the windows again. Inside, their families sat whole, even in the face of a ghost. The summons arrived 3 days later. An official document, Armand's signature at the bottom, A demand for a paternity test and a request for visitation rights. Gianna read it once, then once more. She sat in silence, the document trembling slightly between her fingers. Not because she was scared, but because she was done playing gentle with a man who had never known how to hold anything carefully. Jeffrey took the papers from her hand. His voice was calm. "We'll handle this." Gianna nodded, but her jaw was tight. He doesn't want her. He just wants to undo my peace. And that's exactly why he won't get her. The legal process began. Emails, consultations, court schedules. Jeffrey brought in a legal team whose quiet confidence filled the space with reassurance. Still, the anxiety lingered. Gianna watched Layla sleep each night, tiny fists curled against her cheeks, her breathing soft. She feared what it would mean to let that man near her, what he would say, how his presence might shift her daughter's understanding of love, of loyalty. Jeffrey held her each night through those worries, and promised her, we are her truth. He's just a footnote. Then came the hearing. It was a preliminary session. Nothing binding, no final decisions, but Armand showed up dressed like a press release. Sharp navy suit, gold cufflinks, hair perfectly styled. He even wore a smile. Gianna arrived in a charcoal gray wrap dress, her hair tied back, her fingers laced with Jeffrey's. She didn't need to speak to Armand when she entered the courtroom. She only needed to stand, and that alone spoke louder than anything else. The judge reviewed the documents. "Mr. Leone," she began, flipping through Armand's claim, "you allege abandonment was not your intent." Armand nodded smoothly. "I acted poorly. I admit that. But my daughter deserves to know who her biological father is." The judge glanced over her glasses. "And you came to this conclusion after seeing media coverage of the child." "I saw my mistake," Armand replied, "and I want to correct it." Gianna sat still, watching every word fall like ash from his mouth. The judge turned to her. "Ms. Varela?" Gianna stood. Her voice was even. "When he found out our baby was a girl, he called her useless. Publicly. He rejected both of us with a microphone in hand and hundreds of witnesses." She paused, but not to gather courage. She already had that. She continued, "He wasn't just absent. He was proud of being absent." The judge nodded. "And the child, Layla, has been under the care of..." Jeffrey stood. "I've been present since before her birth. I attended medical appointments. I supported Gianna financially, emotionally, and physically. I've bathed her, fed her, held her through colic and fever. She calls me Da. Not because we told her to, because that's who I am to her." Armand scoffed under his breath. The judge raised her hand. "Mr. Leone, do not interrupt again." When the session ended, no verdict had been issued. But something had shifted. Even the bailiff looked at Armand with something like disdain. Outside the courthouse, a few reporters hovered. One of them stepped forward, shoving a microphone toward Gianna. "Gianna, is the baby his?" She didn't stop walking. Jeffrey stepped between her and the camera. Another voice called out, "Did Armand really reject your child over gender?" Gianna paused, turned slowly. Her eyes were clear, her voice calm. "He didn't reject her because she was a girl. He rejected her because he didn't know how to love something he couldn't control." Then she turned and kept walking. Jeffrey followed. That night, Jeffrey opened a bottle of wine they'd been saving. "You should celebrate," he said. "You stood in front of everything that once broke you. And you didn't even blink." Gianna poured a glass, but didn't drink. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking around, at the baby toys scattered across the floor, at the stack of books on the table, at the crib in the corner of the room. "I built all of this without him," she said. "You did," Jeffrey agreed. "And now he thinks he can just show up and lay claim. He can't. He won't." Jeffrey stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Whatever happens next, we handle it together." She turned to face him. "We already have." A week later, Gianna received another message. Not from Armand's lawyers, from Armand himself. Just a sentence. "You've turned my daughter against me before she could even speak." Gianna read it, deleted it, then turned to Layla, who was on the floor playing with her plush giraffe. She bent down, picked her up and kissed her cheek. "She doesn't even know your name," she whispered, "and she never needed to." The video was 34 seconds long. Someone in the courthouse had captured Gianna's statement as she exited the preliminary hearing. It showed her standing tall, Layla's photo briefly glimpsed in the papers she held, Jeffrey beside her. But what made it go viral, what made it impossible to scroll past, was her voice. He didn't reject her because she was a girl. He rejected her because he didn't know how to love something he couldn't control. By morning, the clip had over 2 million views. By noon, it had become a trending sound. And by nightfall, the same media that once titled her from heiress to humiliated had found new words. Gianna Varela silences her past with one sentence. CEO's ex-wife claps back without raising her voice. Mother, strategist, survivor, the new Gianna. Jeffrey watched the numbers climb from across the dining table. Gianna sat with Layla in her lap, spoon-feeding her mashed bananas. She was focused on the baby, not the screen. She didn't care about the views, the hashtags, or the reshared clips. Not anymore, but Jeffrey knew the power of narratives. And this time, the narrative belonged to her. He slid the tablet across the table. She's trending again. Gianna glanced at it, then shrugged. I don't need the world to cheer me on. He smiled. No. But they should have never laughed in the first place. That afternoon, her inbox exploded. Interview requests, endorsements, speaking engagements. Even a ghostwriter offering to pen a memoir. Gianna deleted most of them. She didn't need a book deal to prove she'd healed. She had Layla. She had peace. She had Jeffrey. But one message made her pause. It was from a woman, a stranger. I watched what you did. I left my fiancé this morning. He told me he didn't want daughters either. I told him he didn't deserve to raise one. Gianna sat back in her chair, one hand resting over her heart. She didn't reply, but she read it twice. By evening, someone had dug up the original gender reveal clip. The moment Armand sneered at the confetti. The still frame of him turning away. The sound of laughter that followed. Then they spliced it beside the courthouse footage. Gianna speaking calmly, holding her ground. Jeffrey at her side, the camera never shaking. Side by side, the contrast was damning. The world didn't laugh this time. It recoiled. Comment sections filled with rage. He left her for having a daughter? He doesn't deserve either of them. Gianna is grace under pressure. Jeffrey showed up and chose that baby like he made her himself. Even corporate pages that once ignored her refollowed her public profile. Her name, once a shadow of scandal, had become a quiet anthem. But Armand wasn't quiet. 3 days later, he posted a carefully edited video of his own, standing in front of an antique bookshelf, blazer on, voice solemn. I've made mistakes, he began, but I love my daughter, and I will continue to fight for my role in her life. He ended the video with a slight nod, as if expecting applause. The comment section didn't give him what he wanted. Where was this energy when she was pregnant? You don't get to demand a seat at the table you burned down. Keep your love. They already found the real thing. Jeffrey didn't mention the video. Neither did Gianna. They had dinner as usual. They bathed Layla, rocked her to sleep, and when the lights were off and the house had gone still, Gianna whispered into the darkness. He thought silence made him powerful. Jeffrey reached across the sheets and found her hand. You made silence your weapon. No, she replied, turning toward him. I made it my armor. In the following days, Gianna received a new notification. A private message from one of the gala guests who had once laughed. The woman had commented that night, long ago, mocking Gianna's expression as she stood alone among the pink glitter. Now, she wrote, I was in the room that night. I didn't say anything. I laughed like everyone else. I've never forgotten it. I'm sorry, and I hope your daughter never sees that video. Gianna didn't respond. She simply closed the app. She spent the rest of the afternoon on the balcony, Layla bundled in her arms, her tiny body rising and falling with each breath. She looked out across the city. The buildings didn't look so high anymore. The noise didn't feel as loud, because the only voice that mattered was the one she heard when her daughter gurgled and reached for her face with those perfect, curious hands. Do you want her to ever know? Jeffrey asked softly, stepping outside with a blanket and wrapping it around both of them. About him? Yes. Gianna looked down at Layla. Not now. Maybe not ever. Not unless she asks. Jeffrey nodded. And if she does? Gianna smiled faintly. I'll tell her the truth, that a man once told me she was useless, and she proved him wrong the second she opened her eyes. Inside, the phone buzzed again. Another headline. Another edit. Another message from someone late to the truth. Gianna didn't reach for it. She held Layla closer, then leaned into Jeffrey's chest. and whispered, "We're not who they remember. We're who we've become." Gianna closed the nursery door quietly, leaving Layla peacefully asleep inside. She walked down the hallway, the faint echo of her own footsteps suddenly loud. Jeffrey was in the living room, seated on the couch, laptop open, a faint glow cast over his face from the screen. She didn't speak. She just stood there, watching him for a few long seconds. He looked up. Their eyes met. And she broke. Tears spilled before she even knew they were coming. Jeffrey stood instantly, laptop forgotten, moving toward her. She held up a hand. "I'm fine," she whispered. But she wasn't. She was shaking. He didn't ask what happened. He knew. Another message from Armand. Another headline. Another reminder that some men only feel powerful when they know they have left bruises they can press later to see if they still hurt. Jeffrey reached her and placed both hands on her arms, anchoring her. "Talk to me." Gianna's voice cracked. "I hate that he still gets to speak her name. I hate that I have to share oxygen with a man who threw us away and now wants to drape himself in redemption because it suits his narrative." She stepped back, pacing now, palms balled into fists. "I carried her through judgment. I labored through pain. I fed her with my body. I bathed her in silence when no one offered help. And now he wants credit for simply showing up, for having a name on a piece of paper?" Her voice rose. "He doesn't get to want her when it's convenient. He doesn't get to crawl back when the world starts liking me again." She turned, breath heaving, eyes wild. "I did this. Me. Every step." Jeffrey stood still, letting her rage fill the room without interruption. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her face flushed. She didn't want comfort. She wanted release. "I hate that I still feel anything when I hear his voice. I hate that a part of me clenches, still, that I have to carry the memory of being discarded like I was a misstep." Jeffrey stepped closer. "You weren't a misstep." Her breathing slowed, but her eyes were still bright with fury. He touched her cheek. "You're fire, and that man is drowning in the smoke of what he destroyed." Gianna's lips parted, a gasp escaping. Then something shifted. Her rage didn't collapse. It redirected. She stepped forward and kissed him. Hard. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't slow. It was demand and defiance. Jeffrey responded without hesitation, his arms circling her waist, his hands sliding down to pull her against him. Gianna moaned into his mouth, her nails dragging across his chest as she backed him toward the couch. They fell together, mouths never breaking, her knees straddling his thighs, her hands tugging his shirt over his head. His lips moved to her throat. She tilted her head back, exhaling sharply. "This isn't about love tonight," she said, voice low. He nodded, breath hot against her skin. "This is about reclaiming." "Yes." She reached between them, freeing him from his waistband, her fingers bold, movements firm. He groaned. "I want to feel alive again," she whispered. "Right now, in every inch of me." He cupped her jaw. "Then take it." She guided him into her, gasping as her hips settled against his. There was no pause, no hesitation, just motion. She rode him hard, every movement purposeful, every thrust a decision. Her hands gripped his shoulders. His fingers dug into her hips. Their mouths met and parted again, both panting, chasing a rhythm that neither needed to explain. When her climax came, she bit into his shoulder, her cry muffled, body convulsing around him. He followed seconds later, head buried in her neck, groaning her name like an oath. They stayed there, tangled, breathless. Her forehead against his, her heartbeat pounding like a drum. He touched her face. "You're allowed to feel everything." She nodded, her voice raw. "I needed to burn." He kissed her gently now, softer, slower. "Then let me be the one who catches you when you fall." She looked at him. They moved to the bedroom, neither bothering to dress. The sheets were cool, the air still. Gianna curled into him, pressing her body along his, her hand resting over his chest. For a long time, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence no longer hurt. It healed. That night, Jeffrey woke to find her sitting by the window. He stood, walked to her, and knelt beside the chair. "You okay?" Gianna looked at him, her eyes calm now. "I was just remembering who I used to be. And I don't mourn her anymore." Jeffrey rested his head in her lap. She stroked his hair. She was trying to survive. "And now?" She smiled softly. "She's done surviving." The morning sun had not yet risen, but the room was painted in soft shadows from the moonlight spilling through the glass. Gianna shifted beneath the sheets, her body still sore in all the right places. Her skin carried remnants of last night, marks of need, heat, and wordless affirmation. Jeffrey stirred beside her, face buried in the crook of her shoulder. She didn't wake him. She just watched him. The man who never asked her to perform her pain. The man who simply held her until it turned into power. Her hand moved across his chest, fingers tracing the line of muscle, the scar at his ribs. The one he never talked about but always let her touch. Slowly, he opened his eyes. "You're staring," he murmured, voice husky. "You're mine," she replied softly. He pulled her closer. "And you're everything." He rolled her gently beneath him, arms caging her in without restraint. There was no urgency now, no rage, only reverence. His lips brushed her collarbone, down the slope of her breast, tracing every inch of her like he was relearning it. Gianna's eyes fluttered shut. "You worship me like I'm holy," she whispered. "You are," he murmured. "To me." He slid lower, his mouth kissing the space beneath her navel, making her arch involuntarily. "Jeffrey." "Shh." He buried his face between her thighs and made her believe again. Her thighs trembled, back arched. One hand gripped the sheet, the other tangled in his hair. Her cries were soft at first, then unrestrained, raw, vulnerable, unfiltered. She didn't hold back, not with him. He gave her the space to break and the pleasure to rebuild. When she reached for him, pulling him up, their eyes locked. "I need you again," she gasped. "I never left." Their bodies collided again, this time slower, more deliberate. Her legs wrapped around his waist. His mouth hovered above hers, foreheads touching, breath mingling. She kissed him, not out of desperation this time, but gratitude. He thrust into her, slow and deep, eyes never leaving hers. Every movement echoed something unspoken. "I see you. I hold you. I choose you." Gianna cupped his face. "Don't go easy on me." He smiled faintly. "I won't." The room was filled with nothing but the rhythm of their union, the creak of the bed, and the quiet moans that spilled between them. He flipped her over gently, pulling her hips up, entering her from behind. She gasped again, pressing her face into the pillow, her back arching to meet him. Every thrust pushed her closer to the edge, but not just of pleasure, of understanding. She wasn't broken, she wasn't discarded. She was wanted, loved, worshipped. He leaned down, his chest pressed to her back, his hands sliding beneath to hold her heart from beneath her ribs. "Say it," he murmured. "I'm not his shadow," she whispered. Louder now. "I'm not his mistake." He growled into her shoulder. "You were always the prize." Her whole body trembled as she shattered again. Later, they lay side by side, breath mingling. Gianna traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. "Do you always make love like that?" she asked. "No," Jeffrey replied. "Only when I mean it." She rolled into him, her leg draped over his, body still bare and unashamed. "I don't need validation from the world," she said. "But it's nice to know someone sees what I've survived." Jeffrey nodded slowly. "And wants you not despite it, but because of it." They rose late in the morning. Layla had already woken up and was babbling to her stuffed animals in her playpen. Jeffrey moved first, slipping on his pants and walking over to pick her up. "Good morning, Queen of Chaos," he grinned, lifting her high into the air. Gianna watched them, wrapped in a robe, hair wild from sleep and sex, but her eyes peaceful. Layla reached for her. "Mama." The sound grounded her. Everything she needed was here. In the kitchen, Jeffrey made pancakes while Layla smeared banana slices across her tray. Gianna leaned against the counter. Her body was still humming, her spirit finally at rest. Jeffrey placed a cup of tea beside her. "You're glowing," he said simply. "I feel seen." "You always were." "But now you believe it." Gianna stared at him. "I think I might be falling." He interrupted, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Don't say it yet," he whispered. "Let your heart finish healing. Then tell me when you're sure." She smiled. "I think I'm getting there." The living room was bathed in the golden hue of afternoon sunlight. Gianna sat curled into the corner of the sectional, barefoot, her knees tucked beneath her as Layla dozed beside her. A baby blanket loosely draped over the child's frame, rising and falling gently with each breath. Jeffrey entered quietly, 2 mugs of warm tea in hand. He handed her one without a word and settled beside her, their thighs brushing. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but full. Full of what hadn't been said, what was aching to be. Gianna took a sip, then placed her mug down. I know you want to say something. He smiled, not denying it. I do. She turned to him, eyes steady. Then, say it. Jeffrey shifted slightly, careful not to wake the child between them. I want this, you, her, every morning, every night. I don't want to leave this house wondering when I'll be allowed to stay. I want to marry you. Gianna inhaled, her heart racing despite how calm she appeared on the outside. And I want to adopt Layla. The room felt smaller now, the weight of those words pressing into her chest. You don't have to do that, she said quietly. He blinked. Do what? Adopt her just because you love me. Jeffrey shook his head immediately. No, this isn't about obligation. I see her as mine already. Every time she reaches for me, every time she laughs when I walk in. It's not performance, it's instinct. She's mine in all the ways that matter. Gianna reached down and gently adjusted Layla's blanket. I know, but still, it's fast. Jeffrey waited. You've given us stability, kindness, a place to breathe, she said slowly. But Jeffrey, I only just remembered how to sleep through the night without flinching. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. I'm not asking for now. I'm asking for someday. Gianna turned her face, brushing her lips against his cheek. I'm not saying no, she whispered. But I want to want it without fear. Jeffrey pulled her into his side, letting her rest her head against his chest. I'll wait. She looked up, curious. For how long? As long as it takes for you to say yes without trembling. Gianna smiled faintly. Then, start counting. Later that evening, Layla sat in Jeffrey's lap, chattering away about a cartoon character. On her screen while holding a spoon she clearly had no intention of using. Gianna watched them from across the kitchen island, hands busy drying the dishes, eyes lost in the moment. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't grand. But it was real. And that was harder to find than diamonds. After Layla's bedtime, they took their usual seats on the porch. A shared blanket across their laps. Autumn had arrived quietly, crisp air nipping at their skin, the stars watching silently from above. I used to think marriage was about proving something, Gianna said. To who? The world. Him. Myself. She glanced sideways. Now it feels like the most private decision I could ever make. Jeffrey reached over, brushing her curls away from her face. I don't want a wedding. I want a life with you. She let that settle. I need more time, she said again, softer now. He nodded. I wasn't planning to buy rings tomorrow. She chuckled. You weren't. Well, maybe the day after. Gianna leaned back, eyes closing as she exhaled. I love this quiet with you. Jeffrey turned slightly, pressing a kiss to the side of her head. Then we'll stay in the quiet. No pressure, no deadlines, just growth. She turned toward him, slipping her hand into his. That's the first time someone's ever offered me that without asking for anything in return. You've already given me more than I ever hoped for. What did I give you? A reason to stay. Inside the house, the lights were dimmed, casting soft shadows across the walls. Jeffrey kissed her shoulder as she stood by the sink finishing the last rinse. She dried her hands, turned and wrapped her arms around him. There was nothing sensual in the moment, only warmth. This was what came after the fire. The stillness that didn't suffocate. He held her tightly, as if to tell her with his body, there is no rush. Gianna spoke into his chest. I'm afraid of messing this up. You won't. I've run before. I'll still be here. She looked up, searching his face. Even if it takes me years? He didn't hesitate. Even if it takes decades. The rest of the night was spent wrapped in a shared blanket, side by side on the couch. Gianna resting against him, her breathing syncing with his. She didn't say anything else about marriage, or adoption, or the future. But her hand never let go of his. And that was enough. For now, Gianna stood frozen at the threshold of her front door, the thick white envelope in her hand, trembling slightly. She'd just returned from picking Layla up from school when the manila folder, stamped with a bold red urgent, had been handed to her by a quiet courier in a navy windbreaker. Inside, a petition. Armand Parker had filed a motion for custody. What did he say? Jeffrey asked as soon as he saw her face. Gianna handed him the document. He flipped through it quickly, his expression tightening with every page. He's accusing you of parental alienation, of emotional instability. Absurd. He's smart, Gianna murmured. He knows how to twist things. Jeffrey's jaw flexed. He won't win. They sat down at the kitchen table, Layla in her room, unaware of the storm her biological father had just set in motion. The sun had barely dipped past the trees, but the house already felt like night had fallen. Gianna swallowed. I promised myself I'd never set foot in another courtroom because of him. Jeffrey reached for her hand. You won't do this alone. She blinked. Hard. I can't believe he's doing this now. After all this time, after disappearing, after signing away everything. Jeffrey exhaled slowly. He's not after Layla. She looked up, confused. Then what? You. The silence was brutal. Gianna leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the ceiling as if answers would be etched in the paint. He's trying to undo my life. No, Jeffrey corrected gently. He's trying to remind himself he still matters. The next morning, Jeffrey made several calls, top-tier family law firms, crisis mitigation teams, a courtroom psychologist. By noon, his team had assembled a legal fortress. Gianna stood in the hallway watching Jeffrey speak over speakerphone, pacing slowly with calm authority. Each name he mentioned came with a string of accolades: Harvard, Yale, Supreme Court clerk, domestic defense expert. But none of it stopped the chill running down her spine. I've been here before, she whispered. He turned. What do you mean? Gianna folded her arms tightly. I've stood in a courtroom while he painted me as hysterical, as incapable, as reckless, and people believed him. Jeffrey walked over, stopping just short of touching her. He didn't try to pull her into his arms. He let her breathe. You're not that woman anymore. I still remember how it felt. He nodded. Then let's make sure the judge remembers something else this time. 2 days later, they sat in a conference room with Jeffrey's lead counsel, a brilliant woman in her early 40s named Keisha Randall, known for her steely cross-examinations and immaculate records. He's filed on the grounds of rehabilitation, Keisha said, tapping the papers. Claims he's sober, stable, and financially capable. Gianna's eyes narrowed. He was never an addict. Keisha raised an eyebrow. Interesting. He's manipulating the system. Again, Keisha looked at Jeffrey. He's smart, I'll give him that. But he underestimated you. Gianna spoke slowly. He's not doing this because he wants her. He's doing it because I finally look like I've healed. That night, as Layla lay asleep, Jeffrey found Gianna on the balcony, watching the rain streak the glass. He'll lie, she whispered. He'll say anything. I know. He's done this before. But this time, Jeffrey said gently, you have people who believe you. Gianna turned. Do I? Jeffrey didn't flinch. Yes, me. The lawyers. Your daughter. A long pause. The pre-trial motion came a week later. Armand's team filed for emergency visitation rights. Jeffrey's lawyers countered. Gianna sat through it all, staring at the same wood-paneled walls that once made her question her own sanity. The same rows of seats. The same expressions on people's faces. Distant, impartial, powerful. But this time, she didn't walk in alone. This time, Jeffrey's presence beside her grounded her like an anchor. The judge adjourned the motion with no rulings. Armand had to prove consistency and rehabilitation first. The next hearing would be 3 weeks away. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered, drawn by Jeffrey's name, not Armand's. One asked, Mr. Maddox, any comments about the custody case? He stopped briefly. My only comment is this. My fiancée is an extraordinary mother, and any child would be lucky to grow up with her. That's all. Gianna blinked, stunned. He hadn't told her he'd used that word in public. Later, she asked about it as they walked to the car. Fiancée? He smiled. I said I'd wait. I didn't say I'd hide. The courtroom was hushed. Every rustle, every breath seemed amplified beneath the weight of what was about to unfold. Gianna sat upright in her seat, fingers curled tightly around the edge of the table. Armand lounged a few feet away, smug in his tailored suit, flanked by his counsel. He hadn't looked at Layla once since the proceedings began. Jeffrey stood, calm and composed, his suit crisply pressed, his voice low but firm as he took the stand. I'm not biologically related to Layla, he began, but I have been her father and in every way that matters. The gallery stirred. The judge peered over her glasses. Mr. Maddox, are you asserting legal paternity? Jeffrey nodded. I am. Gianna's heart thudded. His voice held steady as he continued. I've fed her, bathed her, stayed up when she was sick, cheered her on at school recitals. I've read bedtime stories, packed lunchboxes, helped her learn to ride a bike. He turned slightly, catching Gianna's eyes. She calls me Dad. Armand leaned forward. This is ridiculous. He's not her father. The judge silenced him with a sharp look. You'll have your turn. Jeffrey didn't flinch. She knows I'm not the man who made her, he said quietly. But she also knows I'm the man who stayed. The room was still. Even Armand's attorney seemed uncertain how to respond. The judge shifted her attention to Gianna. Ms. Holloway, I want to hear from you. You've remained silent during these hearings, but this court values the voice of the mother. Gianna rose slowly. A breath. Then another. I stayed silent because I thought I had to be strong, she began. I thought I had to prove I could raise Layla alone, that I didn't need help, that I could survive what Armand put me through. She turned toward the bench. But I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live. She glanced at Jeffrey. And I want Layla to live in a home where love isn't measured in DNA, but in presence. The judge folded her hands. Ms. Holloway, who do you want raising your daughter beside you? Gianna didn't hesitate. I want the man who never left. A whisper of emotion moved through the gallery. Armand shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Gianna stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. I want Jeffrey Maddox. The judge nodded slowly, scribbling something in her notebook. You understand what that declaration implies? You're inviting this court to recognize his parental status? Yes, Gianna replied. I'm asking this court to recognize what Layla already knows. Jeffrey's lips parted slightly. For the first time in days, his eyes glistened. The court recessed for lunch. Outside, reporters buzzed, but Gianna and Jeffrey stayed inside, seated together on the wooden bench outside the hearing room. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I did, Jeffrey replied. Because no matter what happens, I want the world to know whose side I'm on. She looked down at their joined hands. I've never had that before. Now you do. When court resumed, Armand's lawyer attempted to argue that Jeffrey's declaration was emotionally manipulative and irrelevant to the case. But the judge cut through the objections. This case has never been about biology, she said. It's about stability, continuity, and care. She reviewed the testimonies. Mr. Parker, she said, your visitation request will be deferred, pending further observation. Any future consideration will require sustained, documented involvement. She turned to Jeffrey. And as for Mr. Maddox, this court recognizes your petition for shared legal guardianship. Your commitment is noted. Gianna exhaled, her hands trembling now that the tension had finally released. The room emptied slowly, but Jeffrey didn't move. He remained seated, eyes closed, processing the moment. Gianna leaned over. You were brilliant. He chuckled softly. Terrified, actually. You didn't look it. As they stepped out into the late afternoon sun, Layla ran toward them. From the steps of the courthouse, where a friend had kept her distracted, she flung herself into Jeffrey's arms. Did we win? He kissed her forehead. We're winning, kiddo. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the judge returned to the bench. Her robe swept behind her like authority made tangible, and her eyes scanned the room, a room now simmering with expectation. Gianna sat still, one hand locked around Jeffrey's, the other resting lightly over her heart. Armand's chair was noticeably further from the table now. He leaned back, legs crossed, face drawn with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. The bailiff's voice broke the tension. All rise. Everyone obeyed. The judge cleared her throat and began. This court has considered the evidence presented over the course of these proceedings. We've heard testimonies from all involved parties and reviewed prior behavior. Medical records, visitation patterns, and declarations of intent. She paused. Then she looked up. In the interest of the minor child, Layla Holloway, and in accordance with this state's definition of parental fitness and continuity of care. Another pause. Gianna's fingers dug into Jeffrey's palm. This court finds that Mr. Armand Holloway is unfit for guardianship. His absence, negligence, and history of emotional manipulation place the child at risk. The air shifted. A collective intake of breath swept the gallery. The judge's voice grew firmer. Therefore, the petition for shared custody by Mr. Holloway is denied. Permanently. Armand rose suddenly. You can't do that. She's my daughter. The judge raised one hand. Security. The bailiff approached. But Armand froze in place, his jaw clenched, nostrils flaring, rage tightening the corners of his mouth. She continued, calm and unshaken. Furthermore, full custody shall remain with Miss Gianna Holloway, with legal company. Guardianship rights extended to Mr. Jeffrey Maddox effective immediately. Jeffrey's chest rose, a deep exhale finally breaking free. Gianna blinked fast. The judge gave one final look. This court stands adjourned. The gavel fell. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light bathed the marble steps in gold. News cameras pointed. Microphones were thrust forward, but the reporters' questions fell away as something more powerful unfolded before them. Layla ran ahead, squealing with delight, launching herself into Jeffrey's arms. "You did it. You told them. You said I'm yours." He lifted her high. "Because you are." Gianna walked slowly toward them. She didn't rush. This moment didn't need rushing. Jeffrey looked at her, one arm holding Layla, the other reaching for Gianna. She stepped into him without a word. And there, in front of the cameras, the spectators, the world, Jeffrey wrapped both mother and daughter in his arms. It was not dramatic. It was not staged. It was simply truth. The kind that didn't require grand declarations. Applause broke out from the sidewalk. People clapped, not just friends or family, but strangers. Passers-by who had seen the headlines, who had watched this case play out over weeks. A woman with a stroller clapped with tears in her eyes. An elderly man tipped his cap. A young boy nudged his father. That's the guy who stood up. And still Jeffrey held them both. Gianna pressed her forehead to his chest. "You're shaking," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "I'm just full." She smiled into his shirt. "So am I." Cameras flashed. But for once, the story didn't belong to the tabloids. It belonged to them. Layla, cheeks flushed from the cold and excitement, looked up at Jeffrey. "Does this mean I can call you Dad any time now?" He crouched low, adjusting her scarf. "You can call me that every day. Forever." She beamed. "Okay, Dad." Gianna laughed softly, her eyes glistening. The three stood at the base of the courthouse steps, unshaken, unbroken, and undeniably bound. Wordless, they walked forward, past the crowd, past the headlines, past the years they thought had defined them, into a new kind of freedom, one not granted by law, but by love, loyalty, and the quiet decision to never walk away again. The glass doors to Maddox International swung open, revealing not just the bustling energy of a company in motion, but the kind of legacy being rewritten. Gianna stepped out of the sleek black car, dressed in an elegant navy blazer, her hair pinned into a neat twist, her heels clicking with confidence across the marble floor. The receptionist stood to greet her, not as Jeffrey's guest, but as a newly appointed member of the board of directors. She still wasn't used to it. Not the title, not the gravitas, but Jeffrey had insisted, not as a favor, not for image, but because of the clarity and conviction with which she lived. "Mrs. Holloway, sorry, Ms. Maddox," the assistant said with a small grin, correcting herself. "They're waiting for you upstairs." Gianna's smile was soft. "Tell them I'll be right in." Upstairs, Jeffrey stood at the podium in the executive boardroom, commanding the room not with bluster, but with calm certainty. Charts, policies, quarterly projections were tucked behind him. But today wasn't about numbers. It was about something else entirely. He leaned forward slightly. "We've built companies, we've built wealth, but legacy is what we leave behind when the applause fades. That's why today we launched the Maddox Initiative for Mothers." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. He continued, "This isn't charity for publicity, it's personal, it's power reallocated, it's dignity restored." Gianna entered just then, on cue, but not rehearsed. Her presence filled the space like music you didn't know you needed. Jeffrey gestured toward her. "This," he said, "is the woman who inspired it all." Gianna stepped forward, her voice steady. "I was once told that being a single mother meant being a statistic, that resources weren't for women like me, that opportunities were a luxury, not a right." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to land. "But I've learned something. Resilience doesn't need pity, it needs partnership, and we're here to offer exactly that." The applause came not with force, but with respect. Jeffrey stood beside her, not in front of her. That was how they operated now, side by side. Later that afternoon, the conference room had emptied, but the warmth lingered. Gianna leaned over the renderings of the new center they were designing. Offices, childcare space, training rooms. Imagine all the women who walk through those doors, she said. Jeffrey came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Imagine all the futures that'll never be forfeited again. She turned in his arms. You didn't just change my life. You multiplied it. He pressed his forehead to hers. You reminded me what power is for. Their silence wasn't empty. It was full of what they were building, together. Outside the glass, the city buzzed on. But within the walls of Maddox International, a different kind of empire was rising. One not just built on equity, but empathy. And Gianna, once overlooked and underestimated, was now the face of a future. They were shaping together, one mother, one daughter, one choice at a time. It was a slow Sunday morning, the kind of morning that didn't ask for urgency, only presence. Light filtered through the sheer curtains of the sunroom, where Gianna had laid out a blanket over the wooden floor. Layla, now walking with a wobble and filled with wonder, had surrounded herself with soft toys, most of which had been gifted by Jeffrey during one of his endless trips to boutique baby stores. Gianna sat cross-legged beside her, sipping warm tea, her eyes alternating between her book and her daughter's curious little hands. Jeffrey entered quietly. He had just finished a call in the other room, still in his sweatshirt and joggers, barefoot, hair tousled. She smiled up at him. You look like a man who forgot the world existed outside this house. He walked over, leaned down, and kissed her cheek. I didn't forget. I just stopped caring about it when I'm with you two. Layla dropped her giraffe plush and made a beeline, wobbling on uncertain steps, toward Jeffrey. She held up both hands as if asking to be lifted. Jeffrey scooped her up instantly, cradling her against his chest. Hey, princess, he whispered, gently swaying. Did you miss me during my 30-minute exile to the office? Gianna chuckled from the floor. But then, quietly, suddenly, it happened. Layla's fingers gripped his collar. Her round eyes looked straight into his. And then she said it. Duh, not daddy, not a babble, not a mistake. Just, duh. Jeffrey froze. His heart skipped, then dropped, then soared all in one breath. Gianna sat up straight, her cup slipping from her hands onto the cushion, barely noticing. Layla giggled and repeated, louder this time. Duh. Jeffrey's breath caught as his arms tightened around her. You said... His voice cracked. You said, duh. His eyes flooded. Not just tears, release. The kind of emotion that rushes in when something longed for suddenly becomes real. He pressed his forehead to hers. You know who I am, he whispered. You really know. Gianna got up, her eyes misting too. She wrapped her arms around them both. 3 bodies, 1 moment. No crowds, no headlines. Just quiet permanence. Later, Jeffrey stood by the living room window, still holding Layla. Gianna leaned against the wall, arms folded across her chest, watching. Him with a smile that held more depth than words could carry. She chose you, she whispered. He didn't turn around. No, you chose me first. And she felt that Layla's head rested against his shoulder now, her little hand clutching the fabric of his shirt. He kissed her hair. I'll never let go. And somehow, in that one word, duh, 1,000 promises had been sealed. The night air wrapped the balcony in stillness. Gianna stood barefoot against the railing, wrapped in Jeffrey's open white shirt. Her curls had escaped their tie and danced in the breeze. The stars above the city shimmered like they too were listening. Inside, the house was quiet. Layla had drifted to sleep, her lullaby still echoing faintly from the baby monitor. Jeffrey stepped out behind her, barefoot too, shirtless, his arms carrying 2 glasses of elderflower and crushed mint, her favorite since the pregnancy. She took the glass, clinking it gently against his. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, how everything managed to burn down and still become something so beautiful? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took her glass and placed it on the nearby table. Then he reached for her waist, gently pulling her closer until their bare chests touched, skin to skin. Their foreheads rested together. I don't wonder, he whispered. I just thank every broken piece that led me here. His lips met hers, soft, slow, searching. Not rushed, not hungry. Reverent. She responded in kind, her hands sliding around his neck, fingers threading into his hair. The kiss deepened, became a rhythm of its own. Breath against breath. Heart against heart. They moved together in slow heat, their bodies entangled beneath the sky's quiet witness. No urgency, No performance, just truth in touch, a language only they understood. And when her head finally rested on his chest, her breathing warm and slow, he spoke again. "I don't have a ring," Jeffrey said. Gianna lifted her head slowly. "I'm not asking you for a perfect yes," he added, his voice low, raw. "I'm not asking you for a wedding date or a dress or an announcement. I'm just asking if, after all this, after everything we survived, you'd want to be mine in every way. As partner, as mother, as love I choose again and again." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, the sacred kind, her hand pressed against his heart. And then, in a voice so soft he nearly missed it, "Yes," she breathed. No orchestra, no applause, just a whisper that broke the sky. They stayed outside long after that, wrapped in one another under the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle rhythm of their joined breath. The fire pit flickered nearby, casting golden light on their skin. There were no more words, none needed. Thank you for being part of this magical journey with love and twilight. If you felt the spark, don't let it fade. Subscribe today and join our growing family of dreamers and believers. Share the love with friends, leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep building stories that shine as bright as the stars. Your voice matters, your presence matters. Together, we'll make every twilight moment unforgettable.